I'm Sophie Carkeek, Senior Strategist at ATPCO, joined by Aaron Robinson, VP Sustainable Aviation Fuel at IAG, Ron Glitman, Vice President North America at Snowfall, and Sarah Boyd, Senior Management Airline Retailing Solutions at ARC. So I'm going to rattle through the disclaimer, and then we'll get going. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the coding, processing, and standardization of airfare-related data by the airline industry to make the distribution and interpretation of airfare-related data more accurate, automated, and efficient. Participants must conduct themselves in a manner consistent with this meeting's industry-wide pro-competitive mission. Because some, if not all, participants represent companies that compete with one another, we must not engage in conduct that could be perceived as a violation of the antitrust laws or the competition laws around the world. Accordingly, this meeting will not discuss or take action regarding any fare, rule, or fee, nor will it discuss or take action on remuneration levels of any intermediaries engaged in the sale of passenger air transportation. This meeting also has no authority to discuss or reach agreement on the allocation of markets, the division or sharing of traffic or revenues, or the number of flights or capacity to be offered in any market. Discussions regarding such matters or concerning any other competitively sensitive topics, either on the floor or off, are strictly prohibited. Discussing or reaching agreement related to these topics could expose meeting participants to liability under the US antitrust laws or under the competition laws of other jurisdictions around the world. Further, so the content of this meeting is not misinterpreted, ATPCO requests that participants refrain from any communications concerning the content over social media or other public platforms. Okay. So this topic of sustainability is becoming increasingly more pressing as political agendas shift and targets get missed, all while the world is heating up. 2023 was the hottest year on record, and experts are already predicting that 2024 will be hotter still. Yet in terms of the global movement for action on climate change, have we made the shift from sustainability, and in particular airline sustainability, becoming a nice to have to a need to have? And let's be honest, most of us are not quite there yet. The reality is that there's a long way to go. We're behind where we need to be. Progress is being made, but it's too slow. And so without succumbing to despair, what can we do? And sustainability experts agree that high quality, consistent, accurate data is foundational. It breeds accountability. It provides corporate customers with the potential for a holistic view of their environmental footprint. And it becomes a baseline from which to act. And without baselines, sustainability risks becoming meaningless. So companies are taking action to decarbonize, spurred by regulation and pressure from investors. The Carbon Disclosure Project is a non-profit that assesses the strategies of companies across all business sectors, and its rankings are routinely used in procurement. Disclosure through the organization was up 24% last year, but most companies, including airlines, are not reporting or disclosing it at the level that would be required for tracking progress and meeting targets and avoiding greenwashing. So although this is taking off, there's still a long way to go. This research published by A4A and conducted by Ipsos shows that airline sustainability is expected and valued by customers. The information that airlines provide is appreciated across the board, especially for these younger educated women, but really across the board. And this is ATPCO research, but all research seems to say something similar, that it's not only corporates and businesses that are beginning to factor in sustainability into their shopping decisions and flight shopping decisions, but leisure customers care about it too. And so how can airlines encourage and maybe even reward this behavior to signal that airline support for making flying greener? Again, getting consistent, reliable data is the first step, and then translating it into a way that resonates with customers is the next step. And as with the consistent underlying data, having consensus around the best ways to display it is key. So ways to reduce their carbon emissions, more fuel-efficient aircraft, operational efficiencies, carbon offsets, and sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. And as an industry, we're putting a lot of faith in SAF to help us meet our 2050 carbon reduction targets. But scaling SAF is a big issue. The production is limited, and it's just so expensive compared to conventional jet fuel. According to the World Economic Forum, using data from Accenture, HEFA, the most popular type of SAF, carries a 300% fuel cost increase. And at the moment, it's the airlines themselves and the passengers, to an extent, that are covering these costs. But unless these costs come down, it's going to hamper production, in a scaled commercial way, and ultimately adoption. So, coming to our discussion, I'm joined, as I said, by an expert and varied panel, so all different perspectives. So if we could begin by each of you explaining your job and why this topic is important to your work.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sophie. And good to be with you. So I'm Aaron Robinson from International Airlines Group, and for those unfamiliar, we're a European conglomerate. We have airlines including British Airways, Iberia, Aer Lingus, Vueling, and Level. So I started working on this particular topic and challenge in the late 2000s. I was at Northwest Airlines at the time, which gives you a sense of timing on that. And I started looking at the emissions data, in fact, for our customers. And for us, we had a relatively, some good story, some bad story. We had 150 DC-9s that were 40 years old. So those were a real drag, let's say, on our sustainability performance. But on the other hand, we had one of our peer airlines, Continental, had the youngest fleet of any network carrier. And so they were very much pounding the drum and telling the story wherever they could of, look, we're a lower carbon airline, because they saw some commercial advantage ultimately in the marketplace. Soon thereafter, we had a request from one of our corporate customers, a consultancy, that had put in their RFP, tell us what your carbon emissions from flying these various routes are, and we're going to include that as part of our decision making. And having come up with the numbers for ourselves, I could easily think of 10 different ways I could game my numbers to come up with something lower, or someone at another airline could do the same. And so it became pretty apparent that there was some commercial potential and misuse, ultimately, if you don't have standardized data, in fact, in place. Looking forward then a few years, starting kind of late 2010s, ultimately corporations really became much more attuned to this, and it became much more the norm to start asking these kinds of questions, build it into decision making, whether it's at the contract level or even ideally what they want to see is at point of sale, ultimately. So I was at United until just last year. That's one of the things we actually did. We added this sort of data, in fact, into the booking path to enable customers to be able to make that kind of decision really at point of sale. And it was really, we saw a lot of commercial benefits in it. Potentially you get some customers who now see a different level, different lever of what to buy based on. And potentially you get fewer customers buying on lowest fare, and maybe they're willing to go and spend a few extra dollars for something that's lower emissions. One of the things we also predicted was that if you can get customers to get nudged ultimately from, let's say, a 737 next gen to a 737 MAX, that's something that helps the company, because we then have lower fuel costs associated with carrying that weight, because it's a more efficient aircraft. In turn, that customer would probably have a better experience on board, because a newer aircraft is going to have better amenities on board, a better experience, and probably be less likely to have some sort of maintenance problem and delay associated with that. So we really saw a big win-win proposition of incorporating this sort of data into the travel experience and through distribution tools. But the problem still remained, how do you standardize that data? How do you avoid someone gaming it? Because you need to have trust ultimately that that data exists. So now I'm at International Airlines Group. The European Commission, in fact, has several regulations in the pipeline, in fact, on this. They're voluntary for the moment. They will become, we expect, mandatory within the next few years. And it covers things like, yes, how do you calculate that data, but also things like how do you display it to customers? And how does that work? And ultimately, there's then commercial implications when you get to that sort of point where you have enough critical mass to work with.
Thank you.
So my background actually is that I come from an airline background to start. Worked at a variety of airlines, answered RFPs dishonestly for the most part to win customers. I mean, that's just a fact of life.
Never
I don't think the airlines are taking me back anytime soon, so I'm happy to say it. But I moved out of the airline space during COVID and onto the travel technology side of the house because I wanted to provide solutions to the same customers that I felt were being bamboozled by a whole host of suppliers within the travel ecosystem. Whether that's, I'm not going to name names, but, some of us in the room, if we were to look in the mirror, we certainly played a role in that in corporate travel. So when it comes to, we're at like the beginning phase really in our emissions journey. So we're still doing quite a bit of discovery and we've had a lot of time to reflect and see what other people are doing. But at the end of the day, I sit in so many of these RFP meetings. I sit in front of so many of these corporations. We get to know their travelers, and this is becoming more and more of a prevalent topic. And I don't know necessarily that I have the answers for them. I get a lot of different information from different places. And so my job is to try to really make sense of that for them, display it accurately, bring it into, the interface so that the corporation can interact with it, they can understand it and all that, but also finding the right partners to do that, and not really taking a role, right? Because I'm in the enabler. I'm not really the one to say one methodology is right, the other is not. But my job is to really just bring them that content and to display it in such a way that is engaging. So we've seen a lot of change in this space. I've seen corporations now come back and say, don't just tell me, how many kilograms, tell me how many baby seals I clubbed by doing this, And so, we're working a lot with this and with the different players to kind of put this all together. And it's kind of been a very sobering moment, as we kind of think of like, okay, the next generation and what we leave for them. And, so being the booking platform, we're also dealing with rail, we're dealing with hotels and all this kind of stuff. So it's been kind of an interesting journey thus far and looking forward to getting my hands deeper in it.
Good. Thanks.
Great. Sarah Boyd, Senior Manager of Airline Retailing Solutions. So I'm probably the newcomer on this panel to sustainability. We at ARC had heard from many TMCs and corporate customers, like, we need sort of an industry-wide solution to this issue. Everybody has different numbers in the booking process, and everybody has different numbers that they're compiling, and there's no one sort of standard way for a corporation to know how much their travel program, and especially their air travel program, what their carbon emissions are. And additionally, here's how much my carbon emissions are. Is that good? Is that bad? Is where along the spectrum is that? And we kept hearing this as we would go to different conferences and out in customer meetings. We kept hearing it repeatedly. So I was tasked last year on trying to come back and think about the discovery process of how we would put together a data product to do that. And that's where we met and started working with ATPCO in their data product as well. So I come from this from a industry standard point of view, and we can make this a one for many solution.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So jumping into the questions. So we're going to talk about carbon emissions first of all. And some airline retailers are already including a carbon emissions attribute either in filters or to compare in search results, or both. How important do you feel getting this aspect right is in terms of the data itself and its display? To any of you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start with this. So one of the things that's, you're right, it is really important because ultimately there's a lot of data providers out there today that are going and saying, we have the data, we have the best answer. Well, really, they have an estimate. The airline is the only one who has the real data, but they have every incentive to go and game the system and come up with a lower number to be as competitive as possible. So there's a challenge there in terms of how to go and create that accuracy, in fact. The other kind of piece to it is, as Ron mentioned, you need actionable data. So, I mean, I flew here from Boston the other day, and there's, I guess, if you look across each of the airports, there's 4 or 5 airlines flying it. So there's a wide variety of potential kind of emissions figures that could be possible on that route. But if you look on kind of early generation, let's say data purveyors, it's all distance-based, and essentially there's one single number and it's not very useful. What do you do with that? It tells you something interesting, but what do you do with it? So there's work to be done in terms of how you build that action. And to me as well, part of it is around what does it mean, right? You mentioned kind of what does 100 kilograms mean ultimately? I mean, 100 years ago is when people started counting calories. And at that time, no one really understood or knew what 2,000 calories a day really meant. These days we can, right? I mean, ultimately, we've got faith in nutrition labels for a reason, right? And whether it's buying a Coke or a Diet Coke, this gives me the information I need, if I care about it, to go and make that informed decision. So there's some literacy building to do, in fact, as well, really probably across society. And we have a role we can play in that as well.
But you're basically saying that the airlines can't self-regulate. And so somebody needs to step in and say, this is the data that you need to report back on. Because my situation is such that I can't get it from the airline. They're not going to give it to me. And if they do, we could talk about how they're going to give that, to us. Honestly, we probably could get it from them, via an API and deliver it.
Yeah.
But there's so many businesses that made their life now out of kind of estimating and then being like, oh, and guess what? We totally figured out what the headwinds are and how much. And so, it's going to have to come from someone higher up to say, hey guys, this is what you got to do and you got to report on it and, deliver this.
I think the whole purpose of tracking this stuff is to change behavior, right? You want people moving from high carbon flights or purchases to lower, that's the entire purpose of this. And so you think about running an airline and you can affect this by the types of planes you're flying, the routes that you're flying, whether you are a nonstop airline or whether you are a connecting airline. So your network. There are so many things that go into this. How high are your load factors on the flight? There are some things that the customer can know up front, and there's a lot of stuff that the customer it has zero control over. You gave the example of you wanting to switch a customer from a newer 737 to an older, from an older 737 to a newer one. The airlines do plane swaps all the time, after booking, and even day of travel. So there's a lot of things that the customer can't actually control. So part of what we have struggled with is what is fair to report on a per passenger basis and what is not fair. So if there is a ton of deadheading crew on a flight, should that be should we break out the entire emissions over all of the passengers, including the deadheaded crew, or should we not? Or should it only be paying passengers? How much should cargo weigh into this factor when you as a customer have no control over how much the airline how much cargo is on the airplane? There's so many factors in coming to a per person calculation, and so getting everybody to agree to those factors is It's very complicated.
Well, exactly. And I think I mean, to be fair, there has been that work. So IATA's done that work, getting the airline fuel burn data, having it audited and getting consensus from the airlines, admittedly the emitters themselves, but consensus on how everyone follows the same methodology. Also, Travelist and Google, they've been working very hard on the same thing, and with IATA to kind of get to that place where, even if the methodology isn't exactly the same, it's as similar as it can be. So you're not, as a customer, faced with like crazy one number there and then for the same flight, a very different number. So I think that progress is being made, but it's interesting what you were saying there about, as a customer, when you're buying a flight based on the information afterward, and then you have to report it, do you use the information that you based the flight purchase on, or do you use the actual afterwards? And I think that is a really interesting question. And honestly, as a customer, I'd want the choice. I don't want to choose the lower one, but that's just me.
And Ron, to maybe add on to one of your points around airlines not willing to provide the data, I mean, half of the industry is going to be worse than average, right? And those airlines, if they're not going to be wanting to share that data because they're not going to want to reveal that fact. Ultimately, they want to look, if I'm worse than average and I don't reveal that, well, then the best kind of assumption a customer can make is that I'm exactly average. So that creates essentially an incentive to avoid disclosing. And even without that, I mean, over time, many airlines, including ones I've been in the past, we had the position of, look, if we go and disclose this kind of data, we raise attention around airlines and climate change. Maybe we get some customers who at some point say, oh, that's a lot of emissions. I don't want to buy that ticket anymore. Now, I think we're past that point these days, but a lot of airlines perhaps have not come to that same kind of conclusion.
We are past that point because people are constantly, because we do rail. We've integrated with a bunch of, different rail providers. And so people are way past that point because our search engine is, we're even showing ferry and stuff like there's so much out there, even just beyond the air portion, everybody's seeking it and craving it to make the informed decision.
Mm. And so how far off, if you're thinking of getting this data consistent, of everyone being able to use it, of the different data sets in terms of rail, ferry, all making sense comparatively, how far off the desired state do you think we are as an industry?
For me, I mean, I would say airlines are not too far apart. Let's say airlines are converging. The problem is, how do we get and distribute that data more broadly and get other people who are kind of creating their own data to back off and essentially say, look, the airlines know what it is. I mean, ultimately, there's a problem of trust, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have someone that can provide some kind of security and assurance that, the numbers on this label are real, right? As opposed to something that's been made up or gamed in some kind of manner. So I think we can get there. Regulation in Europe is stepping in because we haven't gotten there yet. But in a sense as well, that kind of regulation development also puts a bit of a freeze on the marketplace because it says, and for us included, why should we go and innovate and do something new if there's going to be a regulation that shows up in a year? Why don't we just prepare for the regulation instead? And then in Europe, you have the problem as well, where when a regulation comes into play, it's usually 3 years before they're willing to kind of go and take a look at it and reopen it and revise it for any problems that occur. So it can be helpful, but it can also hold things back.
Right. Yeah.
So I work with IATA. I'm on some of the industry groups that's working on the NDC standards, and the NDC standard right now doesn't even have a spot to actually communicate this information out if you're an airline about what your estimated CO2 emissions will be. So I think that's one, it's on the agenda to be looked at in the next year to 2 years. So hopefully that'll be changed. But what we are hearing from aggregators who have to normalize all of this is, one, we need all of the airlines to agree to a standard, because if IAG Group is using one standard and United is using another, I need to know which one is accurate. And I can't show this unless it's normalized across carriers. But then additionally, they're not displaying things in a vacuum. So some of the biggest aggregators are GDSs. And so they also need to display hotel emissions and cars and trains and all of the other things that they bring in to put together an entire trip.
Great. Well, we can turn now to you, the audience, just to hear from you what your experiences are of sustainability in airline retailing.
I just gotta say one thing to the airlines.
Sorry,
like, if you can't give me a webhook to like update me when a traveler's been disrupted, you're gonna now give me a webhook on like your emissions data. Like, I don't buy it.
I think there's a problem there as well in terms of prioritization, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. That is like the traveler that's been disrupted is a failure, right? A failure to deliver, and that's something that should absolutely be taking priority. One of the challenges in this as well has been that I've seen over the years is, as an airline, what's my value proposition for going and prioritizing action internally, kind of on this? Unless there's a clear commercial value, this is going to be, item priority number 100 on the IT projects list, on the distribution projects list. And you get into a bit of a catch-22 because I outlined some ideas around commercial value that can be created, but how do you go and justify that to ultimately get created, to go and do a test, let's say, that, hey, there's perhaps some value to be captured, right? You have to go and ultimately you have to believe that there's a case there.
I mean, I think that
to go prioritize.
I would also say I think that's the value of an industry standard, because the airlines don't just need to connect to you; they need to connect to all of the agencies. And so, if you have it embedded in something like the order change notification from NDC, then when they do tell you, "Hey, this flight's been disrupted, and this is the new flight that your passenger got put on," they could at that time communicate the change in estimated CO2.
And then at the end of the trip, the final.
They could.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like, I can't even begin to tell you guys how many different providers the corporations will talk to me about, in terms of the estimations and the way they calculate. And then at the end of the day, we want it to flow into Watershed via API and this and that, for all of because for a corporation, they're not just producing emissions on what they travel, they're also producing emissions in how they run their business and stuff like that. This is a portion of it. Mm-hmm. And so you play a role in the overall, ESG of a corporation.
Yeah.
And you're a part of it. And it's important to understand that role that you play.
Yeah. So the slider isn't working. I'm so sorry, but maybe we could have a show of hands. How many of you have ever factored sustainability into your flight purchase decisions? Okay. Good. Okay. So moving on to the topic of SAF. So the industry is putting a lot of stock in SAF as the most promising near-term technology to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. SAF can reduce the life cycle emissions by up to 80%, and the industry is relying on SAF for 65% of the mitigation needed to reach the carbon neutral goals of 2050, which is the equivalent of 450 billion litres. Aaron will correct me if I'm wrong. But given this reliance, do you think greater visibility and understanding of SAF, so that life cycle emission of impact on the flight's footprint and on the person per pax footprint, is going to become important in airline retailing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will become important at some point in the future. I think we're quite a ways away from there. I mean, just to give kind of two examples. One is that, many airlines have gone and started to put SAF ultimately as an ancillary you can buy whether in the booking path or independently. I mean, Lufthansa has been quite successful with it. They've raised 4 million, 5 million euros from customers of voluntary contributions so far. Well done to them. But there's also opportunities where that kind of strategy can backfire a little bit, whether it's a greenwashing lawsuit, like we've seen KLM or Delta or United face, or actually 17 airlines in Europe, one of mine included. But there's also instances where putting something in the booking path can actually hurt you commercially. And we had one US airline several years ago that went and they put offsets into their booking path. It used to be kind of after the fact. They put it into their booking path, and I don't know the exact numbers, but to illustrate it, they had a huge increase in performance and offsets, record levels that they'd never seen before. And let's say they were making, $1 million a month all of a sudden in offsets. Well, a week later, the CFO or the chief commercial officer called up and said, hey, our ancillary revenue is down $1 million a month. You need to pull that offset program because it's costing us profit, right? So there's a bit of a downside risk ultimately there. The other piece I would just point to is the European Commission, one of the proposed regulations is called the Eco Label, and they've got essentially 3 components that they want airlines to adopt and display every single time. One is how much CO2. One is what's the CO2 intensity, so emissions per kilometer in their instance. And then the third is how much SAF was at that departure airport by that airline. And the reality is that there's only 1, maybe 2 airlines in the world today that are kind of at the 1% level. Yes, that number is going to go up over time, but even let's say at a hub airport, the best you're going to get is perhaps 5%. And that may send the wrong message ultimately to customers in terms of action that, 5%, we'll see it here, but most of my flights will say 0. Sounds like the industry is doing nothing. And that's perhaps a bit detrimental, in fact, to the message that the industry is doing quite a lot, but it takes a long time to ultimately re-steer the aircraft.
And so from what you were saying, Lufthansa has done a great job of having green fares. And do you think that's the way it's all going to go? So the green fares, from my understanding, they combine offsets and SAF and in different percentages. And they're, So do you think that's the way it would go? Or?
I don't. I mean, I think those kinds of programs, to me, if you measure them based on how much customer uptake you get, you should likely expect failure. Now, Lufthansa's doing pretty well.
Right.
But for me, the value of those kinds of programs is to build customer engagement and education.
Yeah.
And you're not going to go and raise the billions or tens of billions you need to decarbonize through voluntary contributions. I think we all know that most customers are pretty price sensitive when it comes to airfare, but not so when it comes to other things that they might buy at the airport or otherwise.
Yeah. And Ron, you're very close to the customers. Can you think of anything that...
I don't understand the customers with this, to be honest. I sit in front of customers who go, we purchased X amount of SAF. And I go, okay, I still don't get why you have a YQ on your tickets if you're paying for all the jet fuel. Like the whole thing just doesn't really sit well with me when I think about the construction of an airfare and the YQ, the YR, and all this kind of stuff. And I go, and you're buying the fuel for them. So explain to me how this all really comes together. I don't know. Plus on top of it, you sit in front of a corporate in San Francisco who goes, we bought all this SAF. And I go, amazing. And then they go, and you can only use it flying out of LA. And I go, you're based in San Francisco. What the hell does any of this mean? I honestly am having trouble following the whole...
Yeah, it's very complicated, right? And for those who don't know what YQ codes are, it's fuel surcharges, so carrier imposed fees. It's a good question.
Well, I mean, I was a part of the airlines when we added these YQs, mostly to keep agent commissions down. No, just kidding. But also because fuel prices were going up and we wanted to keep agency commissions down. So, now to kind of say, okay, and we want to sell, the actual jet fuel to the people. I'm like, well, we already were doing that. So like now I don't get how this is all.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion about large SAF contracts and how it works, and there's a lack of trust. And I love Darren's point about the calories on the soda, because I think over time there will be standards for how these things are calculated. And right now it's very much a trust element. You, as a corporation, you buy a SAF contract of $1 million with an airline, and you just have to hope and pray, sort of, that they're actually putting that amount of SAF into the system for you. And that's not that's entirely based on brand. I think the other way that SAF is purchased is, you mentioned Lufthansa, for an individual traveler as an ancillary. And that is very difficult to do through EDIFACT. But hopefully with the growth of NDC, you would be able to actually buy that ancillary, the SAF piece for your individual trip easier through a third party.
If your aggregator is going to make that available to
Yes,
you.
of course.
And if you go connect directly to the airline.
Yes.
Okay, so the final piece is offsets. And for some companies and individuals, a logical step to reducing their carbon footprint is to offset unavoidable emissions. So how important are offsets, and what are some of the issues surrounding them?
Yeah, I mean, offsets have been in play at airlines for, I would say, 20 years or so. Actually, British Airways was the first in 2005 to offer a customer-facing program in that regard. Certainly, customers value them because they're relatively cheap, but that also can get you as an airline into trouble. I mean, part of the Dutch court ruling against KLM was saying that, well, we're sustainable because we've done things like pay for your offset for you. And that got struck down pretty harshly by the court. And increasingly, public opinion and corporate customers too are increasingly turning away from offsets as a viable mechanism. As someone who is an economics major, offsets make tons of sense. But there is, also that same kind of trust problem of, is this real? What kind of assurance do I have around it? Yes, there's auditors on it. But part of it, I think, as well, is that for a lot of people, flying is emotional, right? And people want to say, well, even if decarbonizing aviation is more expensive than finding or creating a renewable electricity project here or whatever it might be, a reforestation project, people want to say, well, but my travel got decarbonized, not something that happened thousands of miles away that I'll never see.
For us, it's, look, in the booking paths, people and my direct competitors are doing, the ability to offset or carbon capture, right? And, kudos to them. I'll be honest, been approached by quite a few third parties who have also told me that I can make some money off of that. So it then kind of brings me back to, do we really have the best interests in mind with a lot of the stuff that we as an industry do? And I don't know that many within our industry can come and honestly say that they necessarily do have the best interests in mind. And maybe I'm just a cynic, growing up in Brooklyn, it definitely makes it harder than most people. But, as a New Yorker, I kind of just look at this stuff and go, we'll probably bring in carbon capture into the booking path. I don't know at what stage that'll be part of the model, but it just feels gross when the third party is kind of telling you hey, you make money off of this, and it doesn't sit well with me when the ultimate thing you're supposed to be doing is save the planet.
Yes.
So I have experience from this as from the customer's point of view, because ARC this year, for the first time ever, is requiring us when we go on business travel to purchase offsets or SAF that's available. And it has been the wild, wild west, because We don't have a TMC at ARC. I know
I can suggest one.
So typically we book directly through the airline's website for our air travel. And so every airline does it differently. Some of them have it in the purchase pass. Some of them have it on a separate site that you go to afterwards. Some of them have it not at all. Some of them, and then we are also allowed to use our own like an OTA if we choose to. Some of the OTAs have it in there. I have no idea how they're calculating it and how they're coming to that agreement. And some of the price differences that I see for the same sort of travel between airlines looks vastly different. One carrier will be $150 and the other carrier will be $7 for the same transatlantic flight. And there is no rhyme or reason to it. So it is very confusing for an actual traveler to come across that. And so I think there needs to be a lot more standardization in there.
Well, I think when we don't create these standardizations within our industry, we actually give rise to a whole bunch of these third-party players who then come to the forefront with the dirty money game again. Like, I can't say how slow-moving we as an industry are, and we all admit and we say it, we're a slow-moving industry, and then we don't agree on consensus, and we give rise to bad actors. Why? Why do we keep shooting ourselves in the foot with this stuff?
Well, and I think as well, just circling it back to offsets, one of the things that I think the industry failed at 15 years ago was not taking enough of a view of the importance of getting it right, getting offsets right. Because one thing that we have seen is a huge rise in corporates buying offsets. And a lot of that, in fact, is for their air travel, because that's a very easy, relatively easy to measure kind of piece versus, let's say, what are the emissions from producing my phone or my laptop? And ultimately, it could be that 10% of the entire industry, global industry, airline industry, emissions have been offset by corporates, but we have no idea and we have no claim to it. And we can't touch it because someone else did it, and instead of it having it flow through us ultimately. And I mean, to your point around kind of the money-making aspect, yeah, I agree. There's tons of parties kind of looking to make a dollar here, a dollar there off of it. But I think as well within airlines, we're kind of on voluntary programs. We're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if I go and there's no profit motive to be made out of having a good voluntary program, it'll be priority number 100. But if I go and let's say, and I'll get roasted by the media for having poor performance, right? And airlines have had that happen over the years. But if I go and, pocket 10 cents or $1 and have that go to my bottom line, all of a sudden that thing is going to skyrocket in priority commercially. And I'm going to be, I'm going to have the justification internally to go and add a lot of features to it, a lot of elements that make it easier for customers, that drive volume, and that are better for the planet, probably increases customer satisfaction. But the minute someone in the media finds out that I'm making $1 per transaction off of it, we're going to get roasted then too. So it's really hard to kind of see a pathway where voluntary action by customers is a real winner either.
Okay, so on that note, final wildcard question. I don't know if any of you saw the news earlier this week, the group action in Switzerland, where the women, there's a group of women who were older women, took action against the government for acting too slowly on climate change and won. And it was related to the Human Rights Act or the Human Rights Law. Now, do you think that potentially, that kind of will provide impetus to governments to tighten the screws on to this climate litigation threat could have a cascade effect? What are your thoughts on that?
For me, I think that governments respond to civil society and what needs they see in it. When things like flight shaming started in 2019 in earnest, at my airline at the time, we looked and we didn't see any real detectable change in booking behavior and patterns from those countries involved. But what did concern us, and we expected, and it did materialize, was more regulation coming out of those governments that were tightening the screws and increasing the pressure on us. So to me, consumer behavior is very hard to measure and prove. but regulatory behavior responds to those citizen pressures.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to continue to see that more and more.
Well, we're at time. Thank you so much for being here and listening to our amazing panel. Would you join me in giving them a round of applause?